Welcome to the Peacecast, where we discuss ways to find peace in the midst of tragedies. Each week, we bring you stories of those who have walked through the fire and pain and have experienced the unexplainable peace that only God can bring. Here is your host, Michelle Bader.
Welcome to episode 3. I am so glad you are back for another week to hear another woman's story about how God gave her peace through even the hardest of times. I am so excited to be sitting here with one of my best friends in the world, Deborah Johnston. We go way, way, way back. Too far. I don't want to count the years, then it will show our age. 10 years since the college or so. We met in college. Yeah. And we were roommates at 2 different colleges in 2 different states and had a great time. We even lived in Mexico at the same time for a while. We have actually very parallel lives as far as what things have happened to our husbands and just not having the life that we thought it would be because of health problems with our husbands. And she is an awesome mom and wife. She lives in Boise, Idaho. She is also an amazing art teacher. And I'm going to go ahead and let her tell you a little bit about herself, and then we'll get into her story. Deborah, are you there?
I'm here. Yeah, thanks for that.
You're welcome. Could you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, like Michelle said, we met our freshman year in college and in Longview, Texas, where I'm from, and Michelle came there to go to school. So I grew up in Texas and then met my husband on the mission field actually in Mexico when we were both in college, and well, actually he was a youth pastor at the time. So our lives kind of intertwined into ministry together as as a youth pastor, and then we eventually planted a church, and so our lives, we were in pastoral ministry, and so that's kind of a little bit of history of how I met my husband. And we have 2 boys. Our oldest is 16, learning to drive, which is scary, and lots of prayer. And then my youngest is about to turn 14. So we now live in Boise, Idaho, like Michelle said, and ministry brought us here. But right now, we are actually running a business, and I am an art teacher at my son's school, which is Coal Valley Christian School. And it's one of the biggest blessings in my life. I never thought that I would end up being an art teacher, but that my path has taken me, and definitely the Lord has brought me there, and I love it. And it's just a great place for me to be in our lives right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing about yourself. Could you share with the listeners the traumatic experience that you went through in your life?
She says traumatic experience. I think there have been.
I know. I'm like, there's more than one.
Yes. Yeah, the one that we're talking about today that kind of catapulted my husband and I into this life that we never expected and never planned for, but who does? So it is in 2005, in October, on October 5th to be exact. What happened was we had ordered some staging for our church that we had planted just a year before, and the shipment came in this big semi truck, box truck, and in the process of helping the delivery guy get the huge boxes of staging out of the truck, it all fell on top of my husband. I wasn't there. The delivery was happening in our neighborhood at my brother-in-law's house, and I was home with our 2-week-old son. And I got a call from my mother-in-law saying that she was frantic, that I needed to come as soon as I could, and she didn't know if it was too late. I basically needed to come say goodbye or just come. So it was one of those phone calls that you never that want to receive. And so I grabbed my little infant in my arms like a football, ran out the door. But I do remember right before I ran out the door, I just dropped to my knees for a second, and I just said, Lord, I don't know what I'm running into, but I just give it to you, and I trust you that you're going with me and you've gone before me. So I quickly raced over. I found Brian, my husband, in the back of the truck, just kind of laying on the floor, mangled of the truck. Luckily, the staging had fallen against the side of the truck, and or he would have been crushed and would not, definitely not would be with us. But um, we quickly discovered that he couldn't feel at that time. We didn't know, but his neck was broken because he had no feeling anywhere in his body, and um, so that began our journey. We were life flighted to Loma Linda Hospital in California, and um, he had surgery to fuse his vertebra that were crushed, and that was on October 7th. So basically, during that time, the doctors had given us this prognosis that he would not move again, that we were fortunate that he had survived this traumatic injury, and but preparing us for life differently, as living with a quadriplegic. And we were grateful, definitely. We had many times that we thought that how grateful we were, that he was still alive and still with us. And he had made comments that he would preach from a wheelchair if he needed to. I told him, your sons don't need your hands to throw a ball as much as they need your heart and your spirit, just around them to tell them you love them. And so we had some pretty difficult conversations during that time. So miraculously, a few weeks after surgery, maybe a couple weeks now that I think back, he started to gain just a little bit of movement as he was in recovery in the hospital, a little bit in some fingers, and that was an exciting day. And then slowly, things little tiny. It's funny you celebrate the littlest, tiniest movement because it just gives this glimmer of hope. And I remember the day that we discovered he had hamstring strength. The doctors all came in, and his room was crowded with medical staff and all of the visitors that were there. And they told us if he has hamstring strength, there's a possibility that he could walk again. So that was a very exciting day. But during all of that time, man, it was difficult. And to just think about, okay, life is going to change, and it has changed dramatically, and this is not at all what we see or saw happening. And our church was a great strength during that time. We had planted a church, and I think our church was around 300 or so during that. And the church body grew, and people just kicked in to help, and not only help us, but help each other. We just realized as a body, we were hurting, and we needed to really band together. So that was amazing to see that, and then just see the influx of prayers and people from all over the world. And I remember Johnny Erickson Tata had contacted my husband during this time because they had met when he was young. She went to the church that he went to, and if you don't know who she is, she broke her neck as a young girl, and has spent her life in a wheelchair, but has done amazing things for the Lord. So she had written Brian and said that she remembered him riding on her lap in a wheelchair, and had no idea that his future might include him being in a wheelchair also. But she was such an encouragement to him. But God just did amazing things throughout the journey, and we didn't know what he would get back. Maybe he could walk, but couldn't move arms, and surely we just expected miracles and prayed for miracles. And I think that was the biggest thing. I put this sign above my husband's bed in the hospital that said, "Expect a miracle." So that was encouraging to him to look at every day, to look up that there's always hope. Expect expectation that God um, will do a miracle. So, um, but we didn't know, would that miracle be walking, or would that miracle be in other ways. And I think we saw that over and over again. Um, so that's kind of what happened, and basically kind of the start. I feel like it was the door cracking to a life that we didn't expect. And the struggles, the trials, the challenges have continued over and over since that time. But that definitely was the beginning, and the traumatic event that started it.
Wow, I did not know about Johnny Erickson Tata that he knew her. Amazing. I'll put some links to some of her books in the show notes because I've read, I think, most of her books, and she is so encouraging with just all that she has been through. And so
Right.
that's amazing that she reached out to Brian. So can you tell me a little bit about the day that you left the hospital, what that was like?
It's about 40 days. I believe it was exactly 40 days um, that after the accident that we were able to leave that rehab hospital in Loma Linda, California. And it was just a day of celebration, exciting. Brian had always said when going in there, he says, "I'm going to walk out." And sometimes he would get chuckles from the rehab doctors and the nurses, and because a lot of people said that, and a lot of people didn't. But he ended up he went through so much, learning how to walk again and learning, because for so long I fed him. I make a joke that at one time I said, there are four people in my family, and only one of us can go to the bathroom by ourselves and feed ourselves. And I am the only capable adult here who can do everything. But we got through that, and it was interesting learning how to do everything for a person, an adult who can't do anything for themselves, much like taking care of an infant. So, um, which I had two, one at the time, but it felt like two. So the day we left the hospital, Brian did actually walk out, and he couldn't walk far, but he did walk out of the hospital, and it was an exciting celebration of God's goodness, and getting us through that trial and through that test of really believing that He was going to allow this to happen.
That's amazing. I remember the video, Miracle Man, or, it was all about. And if there is a link to that, I'll go ahead and put that in the show notes so people could watch that. I think that would be amazing for people to see. I remember watching the video, and I've showed my kids the video, and it was such a miracle because I remember the day that you called me, and it was such a shock. I mean, you had a 2 week old, you had just given birth, and your life was changing before your eyes. But I remember, and this was before I went through my huge traumatic experience, that I was just amazed at how you were able to stay in a place of peace. So, could you share with us, how did you find peace during this time?
Well, there was one resounding theme that from the very beginning, I know that Jesus implanted in my brain, um, so that I could really uh, stay solid and have something to hold on to throughout this process. And there were so many things, but one thing stood out to me the most is the idea that Jesus was going to be my rock, that He was
Mm,
my rock. And the day that Brian the morning they were wheeling him into surgery, and at that time, it was, there's risk in surgery. It was just a scary time, and my mom had handed me this saying that she had had for a while, but the saying says, "Although I may tremble on the rock will never tremble under me." And that was, I really held on to that because I felt that, okay, that's how I feel right now, that I can be scared, I can tremble, but the rock will never tremble under me, that my solid rock, Jesus Christ, and my faith is solid beneath me. And He was not surprised by this, and He knew that this was coming, and He had prepared me for that. And then I remember hearing one morning, actually it was that morning, sitting in my car, and the song came on the radio, it on on Christ the solid rock I stand. And I literally felt like, I had not heard that, that old hymn. I grew up singing that hymn, but I had not heard that in so long. And I heard that on the radio station that I always listened to, and had not heard it. And I just knew that the Lord wanted me to hear that. And so that really became my theme, on Christ the solid rock I stand, throughout that time. And um, I just kept, over and over, just kept holding on to that. And God kept confirming that theme, that just, look to me, don't look to what doctors say, don't look to what other people are saying or stories that you're hearing, or even what your husband is saying. Sometimes he would get discouraged, and um, I just had to listen to God. And I remember standing there the night we had flown into the emergency room at Loma Linda. I was standing there while they were doing the traction on Brian's neck, which is where they wait. They had already put the halo, or had they screwed the halo into his skull, which I had to be right there for because Brian wanted
Wow.
me to stay. And that was tough to watch. But then they hang weight from it to straighten out his neck. And there was a whole team of people, incredible people doing this. And the doctor that was in charge of that team came out while they did an x-ray, and he stood beside me and he said, "Has anybody given you a prognosis?" And I said, "Well, yes, I've heard a couple, because we've talked to several doctors, and I've pretty much just heard that he's lucky to be alive, and he probably, the movement he has now is probably what he'll continue to have." And this doctor says, "Yeah, I want to confirm that he won't be able to move again, and but we will stabilize him, and he will be able to lead a good life. There's so many things that can happen." And I remember hearing that and literally feeling God on the right side of me saying, "Look at me, trust me, don't believe what doesn't come from me." And so I told the doctor, "No, I don't think so. I think we're going to believe that he's going to walk."
Hmm.
And so, he, I think he gave me a smile, and, he was a caring guy. So that was just what I chose to do, is just believe in faith, because I believe that's what we're asked to do. Believe in faith, ask
Hmm.
in faith and believe without doubting. And yeah, sometimes what we believe for doesn't happen, but that doesn't mean that our trust in God's plan and his goodness is not there. But that's what we're asked to do, is believe.
Right. Wow. That's amazing how your faith stayed strong through all of that. And I know that sometimes people think when you go through these like traumatic experiences, then he walks out of the hospital and everything's good and life goes back to normal. But I know that's not the case. So, kind of like, you know, um, going further with what you were talking about, since you got home from the hospital and things were not the same, how have you remained, well, first of all, how many years has it been since the accident, and then how have you stayed in this place of peace?
Right. Well, the accident happened in 2005, so it has almost been um, 19 years. I mean, sorry,
14.
14 years.
14.
I'm thinking,
Good thing you're not a
when
math
less than
teacher.
20. I am not a math. I tell my kids all the time, I teach art, not math.
Not math. So that's
Um,
almost exactly 14
Almost,
years.
yes. So I was going to say almost 15 years, but 1 year less. So, yeah, it's been a while, and um, it's true. When we walked out of that hospital, I was in, I believe, some denial of the challenges that still laid ahead of us. And um, it's been uh, definitely an up and down road. Every day is up and down. Brian left the hospital not being able to move his right arm. So he could barely walk, but he had no movement in his right arm. It just kind of hung. And, little by little over time, he was able to get movement back. But the doctors have told him, basically, you're a walking quadriplegic, which that's a difficult term to understand, but
Wow.
it means that you have all of the nerve damage, because when his spine was damaged, there were bone fragments that went into the spinal cord, and now there's scar tissue, around that area. And so everything that was affected that didn't have movement, he mostly has movement. We'd say about, he has about 80, maybe 80 to 90% of movement in all areas, but um, strength, he has maybe 75% of the strength that he had. but the pain is still there. So I think that has been one of the biggest challenges, is living a life with someone that is always in pain. And I know Michelle definitely
Mhm.
knows what that, we have had so many conversations.
Mhm.
Thankfully, we've had each other, but over the years, talking about, how difficult it is, how helpless you feel to live with someone in so much pain all the time. And then the challenges that that brings, they're dealing with pain medications and how that affects their body, and trying to provide for a family on top of that. And Brian continued to pastor after his accident, but the it proved to be just eventually just too much. He wasn't able to handle it physically and manage his pain at the same time, although he was trying. And that all led to its own can of challenges and circumstances.
Mm.
And we experienced some deep, deep pain and loss in ministry, and friendships that we've had in ministry. And because understanding somebody with these challenges and then trying to go through them yourself and be a family, it's definitely takes its toll on us. And I think that one thing that I've learned through the past 15, almost 15 years of living a life that I did not plan for, and that felt like, my path had been broken, like there had just, this big detour sign is dropped in front of you, and you're forced to go, off this path that looks great and amazing and you've planned out, but then you're forced to go through a detour that's sometimes dark and rocky and seems kind of sketchy, and it has its ups and downs.
Mhm.
I think what I've learned is not to have this question of asking God, why, how could you have let this happen? Not living in that place of why did this happen? Because we may never know or understand. God's ways are higher than ours, and um, but it's coming to the place and understanding that God allows things into our lives for our good, right? We're told in his word that all things happen for the good of those who are called according to his purpose. And so I believe that the things that have come into our lives have been the things that are necessary to grow us in the areas that we need to grow in, because Jesus says he comes to give us life, and that we would have life abundant, and we would have that joy. And sometimes that joy and that abundant life does not come in the package that we think it will come, does not look like the what we think it will look like. And we feel like, well, okay, well, this, I guess this is plan B for my life, because plan A certainly didn't work out. I don't believe that God has plan Bs. I honestly think that this path that our life has taken has been prepared for us, and we have been prepared for this and equipped and given the tools that we need. Every experience, every um, place of strength has been given to us to allow us to walk through this, and we just need to believe that we are able to, as long as we keep our eyes on the Lord, just like Peter walking on that water. Keep your eyes on the Lord, because there are so many waves around us, and we can't look at those. We can't ask why. Why are the waves here? How can I make them stop? What do I
Right.
do? Our job is to keep our eyes on the Lord and walk through those challenges, because I believe that that's where the gift is. Like in James 1:2, where it says these count these trials as pure joy. I love that. It says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and
Mhm.
sisters, when you face trials of many kinds. And that pure joy, um, purity is, it means free from contamination. So if we want that pure joy, then what we are going through is a refiner's fire. And sometimes the fire looks, it feels much hotter for some of us. Sometimes it looks differently, but we are all going through that purification process. And if our lives went according to our plans, I don't think I'd be very pure. I don't think I would be able to experience that pure joy and have that growth that I'm meant to have and that God knows that He wants to give me if I had not gone through the kind of trials and the refiner's fire that is necessary for that growth. And I think I know that I definitely used to read that verse, consider it pure joy when you go through trials of many kinds, because this produces perseverance and steadfastness, and this perseverance will finish its race in you so that you would be complete and lacking nothing. I definitely, as a younger woman, did not understand or value that. I kind of read over it and thought, okay, yeah, yeah, perseverance, but
Right.
um, what about these other verses that are so encouraging? But now I really value that verse. That perseverance in life is that it's just pure gold, because I think Michelle and I both know now what perseverance looks like and the cost that it comes by, and how beautiful it is in the times that we need it the most.
I know that you've really spoke to me a lot today in what I'm going through to just, keep
Mm,
persevering and keep your eyes on the rock. And I know sometimes I start questioning why, and it really gets you nowhere when you're just questioning why over
yep.
and over. It doesn't bring peace. It just brings more questions. And so to be able
Mm.
to see, I love also how you said there's not a plan B, because sometimes both of us could look at our lives and go, well, we thought plan A was this. I guess we're on B. But no, you're right. This was
Exactly.
plan A.
Yeah.
It was just not the A we
Hmm.
thought. It's a totally different
Yeah.
A. So thank you. You had so much great information. So is there anything else that you would say to someone who's going through whatever kind of traumatic situation they're going through, or any
Yeah.
additional verses or songs that helped you? I know you already shared a lot of them, but is there anything else that you would say to someone going through something difficult?
That I tell people often, and that I remind myself often, is that don't fear these times of trial, that you've been equipped with what you need, and that this is your path. So, keep your head up and walk steady through this path, knowing that God is with you. And it's in these most difficult times, in the greatest trials of my life, is where I have felt the sweetest, most tangible presence of the Lord. And I think it's because our soul, in those times when our flesh is I think drawn to its most weakest point, is when our soul is most open to God's presence and vulnerable to that. And I believe that those times are sweet now. And I try to always reflect and look back on the times, just like I think about the Israelites, going through the desert, and how many times they wandered around, but God proved Himself over and over. Manna from heaven, splitting the sea so they could walk through it, and just proving over and over, I'm the one who cares for you. I'm the one who provides. I will provide. I try to put myself there and think, I'm in that desert and I'm reading the story. Am I going to fear the next thing, thinking that this is the challenge that God is going to forget me on or not provide what I need? But it's really understanding that no, He is with me, and it's in this desert that I'm going to learn the most about Him and learn the most about myself. And I'll get to the promised land, but this is the gift, is the things that I'm learning through this. So yeah, just knowing, and that I guess taking the time to feel the presence of the Lord during those times, and really seeking His Word, and building your prayer life. That's huge, is just taking that time to pray and spend that time at Jesus's feet, because without that, we can kind of get lost, especially in our world of now, of just technology and their lives of busyness with emails and texts and all these social media. Really keep our eyes focused on the Lord, so that our path can stay straight.
Thank you. You have an amazing story, and I think a lot of people are going to be benefiting from hearing how God helped you through this. And so, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I love it. And like I said, I'll put a bunch of links to books and different things that Deborah talked about so that you can also glean from those resources. So, thank you all for joining us today as we encourage, equip, and walk beside you so that you can know that you're not alone and experience the unexplainable peace of God. We will see you next time.